Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. At Madison High School, nestled in a quiet suburb in the American Midwest, the days followed a calm and almost monotonous rhythm. The seemingly ordinary school was known for its demanding faculty and students who oscillated between mediocrity and promise. Among these teachers, Robert Hastings was a key figure. Tall, austere, with a face often closed behind dark-framed glasses, he embodied academic rigor. His passion for pure mathematics was almost palpable, and his strict and methodical teaching left no room for weakness or improvisation. Hastings firmly believed that intelligence was a shining light, visible to all from the very first moment. For him, true geniuses were those who shone naturally, without apparent effort. He had little patience for students who didn't fit this mold, for those who fumbled, doubted, or advanced timidly. According to him, only those with an obvious spark could aspire to reach the summits. Amid this harsh and unforgiving mentality stood Emily Turner. At 16, Emily was far from a shining star in the class constellation. Petite, with light brown hair that was always a little tangled, she often had a lost look in her eyes, as if she were wandering in an inner world no one could see. Her gait was hesitant, her expression sometimes a little distracted, as if she lived more in her thoughts than in the reality around her. The other students often considered her a simpleton, a term uttered in a low voice, with a mixture of indifference and mockery. Her math grades, while decent, were never above average, which seemed to confirm their judgment. Robert Hastings couldn't help but see her as a disturbing enigma. How could such a self-effacing student sometimes ask pertinent questions or express accurate intuitions? He brushed these thoughts aside, convinced that it was all just chance or a passing effort. For him, Emily embodied the student who would never be among the bright ones, those rare few he had learned to spot at a glance. One Monday morning, like so many others, the math class was plunged into studious silence. Hastings was writing a series of complex problems on the board, in the crisp, angular handwriting he reserved for advanced exercises. His gestures were precise, his piercing gaze scanning the room, gauging the students' reactions. Then he slowly turned his head toward Emily, a wry, almost mocking smile. "Emily, why don't you come and solve this problem?" he said, feigning almost sarcastic kindness. "It's a simple exercise, I'm sure you can do it." A murmur ran through the class. Some students exchanged doubtful glances, others smirked. Emily felt all eyes on her, and her heart pounded. She was afraid, yes, but it was a different kind of fear, almost electric. A fear mixed with a determination she had rarely dared to express. She stood up slowly, each step feeling heavy, as if the weight of everyone's gaze were bearing down on her. Before her, on the blackboard, sat the problem. A classic, perhaps, but sophisticated. A puzzle combining numerical sequences, probabilities, and integrals. A challenge reserved for the most advanced students, those who had already proven their worth. The chalk in her hand felt strangely heavy, but she knew this time was her moment. Emily took a deep breath, staring at the blackboard. Her hand trembled slightly, but in her mind, everything was crystal clear. She was no longer in a classroom, surrounded by mocking stares. She was in her own world, a silent, orderly, infinite world, one of numbers, structures, pure abstractions. For her, mathematics wasn't a series of academic exercises. It was a refuge, a form of logical poetry, a way of speaking without having to explain herself. Because in his life, he had rarely been given space to express himself. Deep inside her, a storm was brewing. She recalled the nights spent alone in the small municipal library, deciphering the dusty old books that no one touched. She thought back to the annotated pages of her secret notebook, where theorems, conjectures, and brilliant insights intertwined. She had hidden all of this, not out of shame, but out of a survival instinct. In a world where she was constantly underestimated, it was better to remain silent and observe. Then she finally lifted the chalk. Her gesture was calm but precise. The first symbols took shape, methodical. She didn't use the usual paths a teacher like Hastings would have expected. No, she thought differently. She translated the complex problem into a functional structure, introducing an auxiliary variable that most students, and even some teachers, would not have thought to use. She remembered an obscure passage in a book on mathematical logic by Julia Robinson, a pioneer almost no one at Madison High knew. This marginal knowledge, acquired in the shadows, was now becoming light. The entire class was frozen. The chatter had fallen silent. The sniggers had faded. A dense, almost sacred silence had fallen. Only the steady screech of chalk on the board echoed through the room. The students looked at each other, bewildered. Some frowned in comprehension. Others watched with a newfound respect, born of the simple fact: Emily was not who they thought she was. And Robert Hastings had stopped. He followed the lines that appeared on the board, and the longer they stretched, the faster his heart pounded. His trained brain struggled to keep up with Emily's fluid, supple logic. She was going too far, too fast. What she was doing was on another level. He suddenly recognized the bold transformation, the conceptual leap, the elegance of the method. He thought he was dreaming. "Wait, what exactly are you doing?" he stammered, his voice hoarse and cracking with disbelief. Emily turned slowly toward him, still holding the chalk. She didn't raise her voice. She explained each choice, each transformation, step by step, as if it were obvious. Her words were calm, serene, almost detached. She was in her element. As she spoke, the board filled with demonstrations, precise notations, and finally, a conclusion as simple as it was dazzling. The last line of his calculation appeared as an implacable truth. A perfect, clear, irrefutable demonstration. A shudder ran through the class. Professor Hastings stood frozen. His eyes, usually cold and hard, were now wide with astonishment. He had never seen a student, least of all Emily, handle mathematics with such maturity, such depth. His mouth opened, then closed, unable to utter a word for a few seconds. "Emily," he finally murmured, "you just solved a problem that's beyond high school level. Even my former prep students would have hesitated. It's remarkable. But why have you never shown us this talent?" The girl hesitated for a moment. Then she looked down, as if afraid her answer was too simple to be heard. "Because no one ever asked me to," she replied softly. "I taught myself. At home, there was no teacher, just books that no one reads at a school like ours. I just wanted a chance. One day." A heavy silence fell over the room. Robert felt something break inside him. A certainty, perhaps, or misplaced pride. He thought back to all the times he'd ignored Emily, judged her without trying to understand her. He'd thought he saw intelligence in the noise, in the arrogance of the top of the class, in the visible outbursts, and he'd despised the silence, the apparent slowness, the humility. Hastings looked away briefly. He felt a familiar burn, shame. Before him, the class remained silent. No one laughed. No one whispered. They all understood that something rare had just happened. Emily Turner, the invisible girl, had just imposed herself by the sheer force of her mind. She hadn't just solved a problem. She had demolished prejudices, overturned certainties, opened a breach in the way people viewed her, and perhaps themselves, too. In the weeks following this momentous event, the dynamic between Emily Turner and Professor Robert Hastings changed dramatically. Hastings, deeply shaken by the revelation of Emily's quiet genius, began to reconsider his role as a teacher. He, who had always believed himself an impartial judge of intelligence, discovered that he had missed a rare brilliance simply because he hadn't learned to recognize it. Every day after class, Emily stayed in class, no longer out of obligation, but out of passion. Hastings assigned her problems from international Olympiads, excerpts from academic publications, and articles in number theory and topology. Emily absorbed them like others read novels. She didn't copy methods. She understood them, deconstructed them, and reformulated them in her own way. She asked pointed, sometimes disconcerting questions that even forced Hastings to delve back into his old textbooks or seek advice from his colleagues at the local university. But above all, she opened up. Emily, who until then had gone unnoticed in the halls of Madison High School, was gradually asserting herself. She didn't need to speak loudly. Her gaze became more direct, her voice more assured. It wasn't arrogance that was growing within her, but a serene confidence, built on solid foundations. She understood that she had the right to exist fully, intellectually, humanly. She was no longer the one who is forgotten, but the one who is listened to, because she had something to say. Encouraged by Hastings, she entered several regional competitions. At first cautiously, almost on tiptoe. Then, as she won, she gained pride. She beat students from prestigious private schools, the sons and daughters of professors and researchers. But it wasn't glory that attracted her. What she loved was the challenge, the abstraction, the dizzying flow of ideas. She adored the hours spent contemplating an insoluble problem, gradually grasping its flaws until the key was revealed. Meanwhile, Robert Hastings, too, was undergoing a quiet transformation. He began to teach differently. He no longer looked at his students with the same eyes. He asked open questions. He left more room for hesitations and unusual approaches. He spotted other students who were shy or awkward, and instead of reprimanding them, he simply asked, "Explain to me how you see the problem." It was a revolution in his own way of thinking. A year later, Emily found herself a finalist in the prestigious Clark Prize, a national mathematics award given to outstanding young minds. The competition was fierce, but Emily stood out not only for the quality of her answers, but especially for the originality of her reasoning. One judge said that she thought like a 40-year-old researcher trapped in the body of a 17-year-old high school student. At the ceremony in Boston, held in a large university amphitheater, Emily took the stage wearing a simple dress, her hair up, and her gaze peaceful. In the audience, her parents, discreet, moved, held hands. And among the honored guests, Robert Hastings was invited to give a speech. He stood up slowly, microphone in hand, then looked around the room for a long moment before speaking. "A year ago, I was confronted with a truth I had long refused to see," he said in a deep voice. "I believed, my entire career, that intelligence was a light visible to the naked eye, that the brightest students were those who naturally stood out. I learned, thanks to Emily Turner, that some treasures are hidden in silence, that sometimes you have to dig for a long time to discover a nugget." Emily didn't just impress me. She transformed me. Her courage, her patience, her boundless curiosity are a life lesson. Today I am proud to have been her teacher, but above all, honored to have been her student in my own way. The audience rose to its feet, applauding warmly. Emily smiled, her eyes slightly moist. She looked at Robert Hastings, then at her parents. She thought about how far she'd come, about that icy morning months earlier, when she'd picked up the chalk without believing it, her heart pounding in mocking silence. And now here she was, recognized, respected, admired. That day, Emily realized that true genius isn't just about solving equations, but believing in yourself when no one else does. She knew now that she would never be invisible again. And in his heart, a new equation had just been solved, that of his place in the world.